very pleased to introduce to you today Maureen Stanley, Chief Risk Officer of Elavon, who previously held leadership roles in Bank of Ireland, including Group Chief Compliance Officer and Group Head of Integrated Planning. James Marr is Group Head of Compliance, Permanent TSB. James spent many years in leadership roles in the compliance function of AIB, and before that in various other roles in the bank. And Ger Lawler, Ger was Head of AML in AIB, and following her relocation to the UK in 2012, has held global lead roles in anti-money laundering in Barclays and Royal Bank of Scotland. And Ger is now Global Head of Financial Crime in KPMG. And just an opening question. When I was little, not many people know this actually, I don't even think my husband knows this, but I actually wanted to be an interpreter and a translator. I did not even think about going into the corporate world. I saw myself sitting in a booth talking to world leaders and translating for them. It's been, it hasn't really worked out for me. So what did the panel want to do when they were little? Did they see a career in compliance or banking or insurance? Ger?
Who do you want to ask?
Ger?
Okay.
I'll pick on you. So, yeah.
Pointingly, I'm going to tell you that I wanted to go into banking, and that was mainly inspired by my mum, who was a banker, and she often told stories of how she'd enjoyed it so much, and I suppose that had an influence on me. So it was a career that I was interested in, with probably not really knowing what it entailed, other than some of those stories my mum had shared. And obviously, when I started down this route, I found that there was so much more to it than I ever thought when I first started on this track. So it's been an incredibly rewarding career, and don't regret it for a second in terms of making that choice.
Yeah. So how did you start in compliance?
Purely by accident. I think a lot of people end up not even realizing they're in a job called compliance until you're in. When I grew up on a farm, I'm originally from Mayo, and my parents moved to a dairy farm in Kildare. So I actually wanted to be a vet when I grew up, and I had the unfortunate introduction to some of the training that vets have to go through, which completely put me off wanting to be a vet. So then I started my career in the civil service, and eventually I ended up in banking. And my first introduction to compliance was, I literally was the sort of person who was volunteered to implement the first Criminal Justice Act in 1995, which was implementing the requirements around AML and getting passports and address verification for customers, which we thought was going to ruin the whole industry, by the way, back in 1995. And next thing I knew, every time a new piece of regulation came in, it kind of came to me. And next thing I knew, I was the compliance officer. So it happened in reverse. So it wasn't something that I set out to do.
Okay. And James, how did you start in compliance?
Yeah, I was actually commenting that you have a missed role as an interpreter, given the command of Irish as you opened the conference. But look, how did I start out in compliance? I've been working in internal audit. I suppose AIB was building out a compliance function in 2004 following the Allfirst fraud. AIB was strengthening a lot of its control functions, and I was looking for, I suppose, some change at the time. I'd been in audit for a while, so compliance was becoming more prominent. A lot of investment. It was being described as the new black at the time. I think we're well beyond that now. So I moved in there, and I got a great chance actually to work with some predecessors of yours as president of the association, who were at Philip Brennan, and also Niall Gallagher, who we all know in terms of his founding role. So it was a great introduction for me and a great building of experience,
Okay. So having made that journey now, Maureen, what do you think is the difference between an advisor, partner, and a compliance leader? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when I reflect on the role of the compliance officer, I think you have to be all three. I think very much you have to be all of those. you know, all of those roles. But I think your opening address very much talked about, you know, I hadn't thought about it in those phases before, but certainly the phases that you spoke about certainly resonated. I think the role of the compliance officer is very much part of the strategic development of financial institutions and the organization in which they work for. It isn't about providing advice and guidance on the rules and regulations anymore. It's very much about enabling the strategic agenda, being forward looking, thinking about where regulation is going. And so I think that has, over particularly in recent years, changed how we should think about the role of compliance and risk management more generally, but particularly the role of compliance, setting those standards and setting the benchmark for the organization in terms of the culture that we want to represent, but also you know, that our strategy and where the organization is going very much embraces the standards that we espouse to. So I think the compliance officer plays that key leadership role for the organization. Now it's everyone's role, but very much they're the exemplar and the go-to person when you want to, you know, chat about your business strategy and where you're going, and that sort of trusted business advisor. So I think it incorporates all elements.
Okay, thanks. James, what part does communication play in being a compliance leader, and you know, how do you be an effective communicator as a compliance, trying to get your compliance message across?
Yeah, Kathy, it obviously plays a huge part. I think Maureen pointed out that, you know, it's no longer about telling people what the regulations are. I think as a compliance officer, you're managing multiple stakeholders. You're managing the engagement with the first line business. You know, you're managing engagement with your own team and your own colleagues. You're frequently should be alongside the senior business leaders in engagement with the regulator, rather than being the voice of the organisation with the regulator. But nevertheless, it is a key part. And clearly there's the engagement with the board as well. So communication runs right through everything we do. I think it's about being able to, for some people, about being very able to effectively communicate what the intention of regulation is. But it's also around being able to shape and influence. And, you know, I think a key part of compliance's role is about helping colleagues to achieve the balance between getting results and how you get them. So, you know, very strong communication skills, the ability to adapt communication skills to different settings are very fundamental now to a compliance officer, I think.
Yeah, I take your point. I think it's important to, sometimes if you talk to people about the policy objective behind a rule, that it wasn't invented just for the fun of it. Sometimes that, you know, develops their understanding and you know, can win some buy-in there. Ger, do you have any role models, leadership role models? It doesn't have to be in business, or, you know, is there anybody that you look up to, and what attributes do they display that influence you as a leader?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I've had different role models throughout my career for different reasons, and you know, my mum would have been my role model in the past in terms of things I saw in her, qualities, like, you know, that sort of practicality. She was always acted with integrity and just sort of that resilience that she had. Moving on from that, and then within the environment, I remember I worked for one particular individual who, when the system had fallen down around us and we were, you know, looking to address it, he had once said to me, you know, everything can be fixed, it's just about staying calm. And that always stayed with me in terms of when you hit challenges and you look at what's sitting before you, it's actually about staying calm and working through it. And you always find a way through, to be quite honest, and working with people. And I have had different role models throughout my career, people I've looked up to who have inspired me on a, you know, not only just within my role, and I could see the Labradors out the back within my role, but I think other people I've seen outside of that. So, you know, people like Michelle Obama does inspire me. I see somebody who has been instrumental, you know, behind Barack in terms, excuse me, of his success, and, you know, her intelligence, her passion, her drive as well as part of that. another person I've worked quite closely, and particularly in the last few years, is Ruth Durnley, who's the CEO of Stop the Traffic. And, again, it's that sort of passion, that vision that she has for, what she's trying to achieve, her humanity, all those kind of features do inspire me, and I just think that's really important in terms of, particularly for us as leaders now, and have other people look to us and get their inspiration from. And it's going to be quite challenging in the current environment when you're doing a lot of things virtually and you're not in the workplace. And who do our sort of younger, up and coming sort of managers and leaders look to? Those behaviours we sort of instill in our day-to-day environment, the values that we bring to the conversations. It's harder for them to see those, and I think that's just something we need to be sort of conscious and aware of. But I think, yes, I mean, in summary, there have been many different people, both externally and internally, that that certainly would have influenced me.
Yeah, and I certainly feel when I look back on my career, there have been times when I've struggled to identify a role model in my immediate circle or in my immediate work environment, and I felt that that was created a definite void for me, and so I think it's really important actually to be able to identify someone who you feel demonstrates those behaviours. Just to stay with you for a moment, you were in a senior role in AIB and then you moved to the UK, and you've spent a number of years now in London. How did you face going into your new environment and starting again from the beginning, or was it starting again from the beginning and establishing yourself and your leadership credentials?
So I suppose, like, I was 26 years in AIB, so it was quite a decision and a move to suddenly decide, not only to sort of change organisations, but actually change countries as well in terms of moving the family. And that said, that sort of that background that I'd had in AIB it was almost my apprenticeship in terms of my training ground, and I learned my craft within AIB and understanding how the bank works. I was in the business, I was in operations, I was in IT, I was in internal audit, I worked in capital markets, then I kind of gone into a group role. So I had done many of the things and learned a lot that were absolutely beneficial to me when I went across into the UK. And suddenly realised actually I could look across the agenda. I could work very well with the business because I understood where they came from. I understood the challenges they were exposed to, what they were trying to solve for, because I had experienced in AIB as well. And I suddenly found that became very valuable to me in terms of going into a tier 1 bank where it's real intensity. And all of the other things, like a bank is a bank, customers are customers, products are products, you suddenly realise that actually there are a lot of the same issues that they're dealing with. It's just is about scale. And so I found that really, I suppose, comforting to some degree, and then suddenly finding that actually I had a dimension that others hadn't when they had sort of developed a skill set in a particular area that didn't have that broad knowledge across how things worked in practice, coupled with the fact that I was also very active in the industry, so I was well known in the UK. I had started chairing industry panels from about 2004, and I moved to the UK in 2012. So I was already known as in that sort of leadership role at an industry level. So from that, it's not like I suddenly went in as an unknown person, and I actually just picked up that kind of role with more intensity when I was in the UK as well, and took on more of those leadership roles in other areas as time passed. So it probably wasn't as daunting as I thought it would be. And, and as I jokingly said to a couple of people, by 11 o'clock in the morning on the first day, a coffee time came, I suddenly realised, oh yeah, this is just the same actually. And so it's not going to be, that challenging. And you just build networks, it's what you do. And so you get on with that, get to know people. You're new, you're novel, so actually people are keen to actually meet you. And I think, that was great as well. So I didn't find it that challenging, and I've just enjoyed all of it, to be quite honest.
Okay, great. And are there things that you've seen in the UK that they do better here from a leadership perspective, or in a compliance context, that we could learn from? Is there anything you particularly admire that we could learn from here?
I certainly think, and I'm seeing, I mean, we had in Ireland, the sort of fitness and probity has been there for a while in terms of, you know, the importance of the compliance role, you know, that kind of accountability regime. And I see that's kind of moving as well in a similar way to what's happening in the UK. But one of the things that has been pretty evident in the UK from when I arrived was actually the importance of compliance and the senior role that it held, the amount of investment that was being put into it to sort of take it to that next level. You know, the fact that the senior managers regime has been running and is applied to people in control functions just as much as it is in business roles. You know, and as I had said to people, when that came in, you can either fear it or you can embrace it, and you can either realize that you've been played the joker or you've got the ace. And so, and it's how you actually take on that senior manager accountability and sort of bring that to the organization in terms of, you know, setting that vision, sort of building that partnership around, you know, establishing a framework that sort of respects the regulations, but also allows the business to flourish as well. So there's lots of opportunities there that I've seen working quite well. What's also different from a UK perspective, and where some of that intensity comes in, is the UK has been quite central in the area of financial services on a global scale, and has quite an important role in there. So, you know, you move more sort of from beyond a domestic focus into that global focus, and needing to engage with, you know, the sort of Asia, with the Americas, you know, and even in my role in Barclays into Africa. So you're building programs that actually have a global implementation and application rather than something that's more domestic in focus. And you've got regulators that are very active in the market, you know, from an FCA perspective, and also sort of the US regulators. So that was quite different and interesting. You know, but I think I saw things and practices that were already there in Ireland that I think, you know, are very much what was happening in the UK. So it's just not at the same scale, but it's very much there in terms of discipline, principle, expectation. You know, the sort of the integrity, the standards, and the accountability framework was already there anyway in Ireland when I was leaving. So, so I think just the difference is actually about scale.
Okay, that's interesting. James, when we talk about skills or values, perhaps in leadership, what do you think are the values that need to be demonstrated, or what are you looking when you're recruiting? What are the values that you're looking for?
Yeah, Kathy, I think when we're looking for, I think values are, to me, around things like making a difference, that you're looking for people in a compliance role who genuinely believe in positively affecting outcomes for customers and for colleagues. I think that's a really important value. Integrity, I think in the nature of our role, you know, integrity is just fundamental. And integrity is, you know, often associated with ethical values, and it clearly is, but you're also looking to things such as, you know, delivering on your promises and fulfilling expectations and being able to demonstrate that. I think that's a critical element as well. And I think third value is one of respect. I think, you know, we will have difference of viewpoints with people, but we should always have respect for others and where they're coming from. I think that's becoming increasingly important as we move into, you know, much more focus, and rightly more focus on diversity and inclusion. You know, it really important for that understanding of respect. So I think there's some of the things that we'll be looking for. I mean, you know, technical skills is a given. Technical skills are probably easier to build. But if you're looking to values, I think they're the type of values that you would be looking to.
Okay. And Maureen, would you have anything to add to that in terms of the values you look for?
Yeah, I mean, I think just listening to James there, I think they very much resonate. I think the integrity piece is critical, because the role is so important for both for the board and for the organisation. Focus on customers, and I suppose a business acumen. I think having a deep understanding of the business that you're supporting and working for is really critical, and with a core focus on the impact on customers. Obviously colleagues taken as a given, But when we implement policies and standards, is it really driving better outcomes for us, for customers being at the core of people's requirements? And maybe it's not a value, maybe it's an attribute. I think certainly people with resilience. So I think certainly some of the speakers spoke about that earlier today, in terms of when we turn up, we aren't always the most welcome, because there's usually a challenge or an angle that hasn't been considered, or a rule or a new piece of regulation that needs to be taken into account. And naturally, when businesses are really enthusiastic about a new product or service, you're coming in with a bit of cold water, and that can feel, it can feel like rejection, but actually you're doing it for the greater good of the organization. So I think a core sense of resilience is really important as well.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And Maureen, have you had a really difficult challenge as a leader, something really frustrating, or a persistent challenge, and how have you overcome it? If you're able to give us any detail.
Sort of every day of the week. No, I mean, in fairness, there's lots of, from the organizations I've worked in, we've gone through, like all the banks in Ireland have gone through, particularly enforcement actions, or even anticipating where potentially we may end up in an enforcement action, etc. So I think implementing change is always a challenge, and obviously the bigger the change to the business line, it obviously creates more challenge. But ultimately, I think some of the, again, just maybe reflecting on even the speakers this morning, building that network is really important. So you just can't come in the first day with a whole set of change. You're really building on your own reputation, that you've garnered through implementing your role and implementing your compliance program. So certainly having a deep understanding of the business, having that network internally within the organization at key leadership roles, so that they understand the direction of travel, the standards that are expected. So when a new change comes in, it's not such a jolt to the system. But I think any compliance officer worth their salt has had those major challenges of a business wanting to go a particular direction, and maybe an acquisition, and maybe a new product, and where there's a fundamental compliance challenge or conduct challenge that you need to hold your ground on. And I've always used my influencing skills to get the right outcome, and very often the business will come up with an angle or a position that even I haven't thought about that will mitigate the risk. But I think ultimately, working with the business line and having those open discussions, and I suppose open debates around where the relative positions are, is really, really important, because you can't burn bridges, because next month you'll be back to that same bridge again, and you have to work with these people again. So it's really important to hold your ground, but be collaborative, and I suppose as understanding as you can of the business position. Notwithstanding that, I often used to coin the phrase, and I don't mean this disparaging, I say I can put as much sugar on the pill as we want, but we're still taking the pill. So I'm happy to work with people and make it taste as best as possible, but the standard is still going to be adhered to.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I think I might use that one, actually. Good one. Now, we can't really talk about compliance and our working environment, I think, without touching on the pandemic. Ger, I know you're in London, and you've probably got different challenges, but it'd be interesting to understand what extra or specific challenges the pandemic has brought to you as a compliance leader. Especially, I know you started a new role, I think just as lockdown was hitting in the UK. So what have your challenges been with the pandemic?
Well, just from a personal perspective, going into a new sector, as you say, and a new role in a virtual environment is challenging, and has been challenging. I don't know as many people, we'll say, in the consulting side as I would have known in banking. So, you know, that's a sort of a personal challenge to deal with, and particularly in an organisation like KPMG, it's a networked organisation. So it is all about building those relationships and needing to find a way to do that in a virtual environment. The other side that I've seen just in relation to how the industry is managing it, and I've been looking at it under the broader financial crime lens, so thinking about fraud in there as well, is, you know, there have been a lot of challenges around some of the initiatives to put into the market in terms of the expectation of the industry to support the economy, you know, to put things, you know, in things like in the UK, like on B-bills, for example, and to do that in an environment where it's about speed and you're trying to, you know, sort of leverage the existing controls that you have, and the propensity for fraud within that is a growing problem and challenge that's there as well. I spoke about just, you know, the personal side from the younger people or more junior, the challenge they're having with operating in that more isolated virtual environment. And what we have seen as well, and what I'm hearing in the industry, is operationally there are a lot more errors being made, and it's one of the reasons that they're driving to get the workforce back in, is because you don't have that secondary oversight that traditionally you would have if you were working in the same environment. And in some lines of business, like investment banking, errors can cost money if you have to reverse out a transaction, for example. So there are certain things there that are driving the need to get people back to support them in what's happening around that, you know, and just that general interaction. I think what this has shown is how agile we are, our ability to adapt very quickly. We moved into this environment without much sort of preparation, and suddenly everybody started to perform, and it was quite extraordinary to see that. So there's a huge lesson in that in terms of our adaptability and our resilience and our ability to actually continue to do that. But notwithstanding that, there are still some challenges, and it's all about that happy medium. And I think going forward, it will be about how do you support that flexibility and balance in the working environment that allows some of that home working, whilst at the same time actually needing people to be in around here, look for their inspirational leaders, being able to operate effectively in what we're looking to make sure that we can continue to apply those controls that we wanted. And so it's been quite an interesting journey from that perspective. And all the while, actually, we have also seen a real uptick in regulatory scrutiny and oversight. And so a lot more 166 is hitting the market, as well as regulators are starting to look at the and say, right, I want a review done. So there's no let up in that particular area, and, you know, the support that organisations need is ever present. And if anything, it has become more elevated as a result of the whole experience.
Okay, thank you, Ger. James, have you seen anything then locally in Dublin? Any other challenges?
No, I think Ger has covered quite a few of them. I think the one thing we've seen, and Ger talked about that move to remote working, you know, we've seen our organizations reorienting themselves very, very quickly. And, you know, in banking, very traditional hierarchical organizations where we've just had to move our entire support workforce into home working. And, you know, in ways that probably a year ago people would have thought was going to be impossible. And I don't think we'll go back from that. And I think Ger is right. I think the ability to support flexibility in the workforce going forward is going to be really, really important. And, you know, the issues of errors, there undoubtedly that is a factor when you have people working remotely. You know, juniors who don't have that oversight. I think there's another challenge for organizations, and it is on the onboarding. But if you're dealing with a remote workforce, how do you build values in the organization? How do you ensure that, you know, as people have been brought on board, or indeed people in the organization, that they retain that linkage to the values of the organization and what the organization is trying to achieve, because they're quite remote. So I think there's a real challenge about engaging with our staff and people who are working remotely, and keeping that contact. You know, you miss sort of the water cooler moments, the ability to get things done very quickly in networked organizations, and having that you have to find a way of addressing that and resolve and dealing with that. I think, yeah, the regulatory scrutiny is extremely high. There was an increasing focus on operational resilience in the last 2 to 3 years anyway. I suppose this has been a real test case for operational resilience, but the ability to sustain that over time, I think it will also challenge the industry probably to use technology even more effectively. And I think when you talk to things like errors and that, it is probably going to be about how we use AI to better provide some of those control points and things like that. So I think it's an interesting thing. I think that it has presented huge challenges, but I think it actually presents huge opportunities. And I suppose the other piece when you look at it is in financial services, our customers have made a huge journey as well. You know, they've transitioned away from going into physical locations to going online, and you know there's been huge challenges in enabling that and supporting that as well, but that may reverse to some extent, but it certainly won't reverse significantly. So it's reshaping the industry we're working in as well in quite a significant way. And you know, all those learnings are going to have to flow through into how firms look at their strategy over the next few years, and maybe the pace of investment in certain areas is going to have to intensify. So a lot of challenges, but a lot of opportunities as well, I think.
Okay. Maureen, I saw you nodding to a lot of that. Have you anything to add to that from a US perspective even?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously I changed jobs from, I had the transition from being the Chief Compliance Officer to the Chief Risk Officer in February of this year. So that was kind of a new change in role for me to a new organisation, a European organisation. So while we've lots of people in Ireland, you know, our organisation is spread across 5 jurisdictions across Europe. So I have to say 3 weeks in, I wasn't expecting to go straight into lockdown. So I had the kind of personal challenge of getting to know my team and getting to know the business. Plus, obviously, as a Chief Risk Officer, you know, I'm accountable for the effectiveness of the risk management framework, and which was right at the forefront of ensuring that we could run our operations effectively while 99% of us were working from home. So, so that was a particularly sort of bit of a baptism of fire. But what I would say is that was probably a great way of straight in the deep end, no time for the niceties. You just had to learn it and learn it really quickly. I think for me, what I would have said was it really brought to fore the importance and the value of risk management. Like we, you know, so in terms of the resilience of our business continuity plans, the benefits of the investment in operational resiliency, you know, has been, you know, but also I think the value, particularly to those organisations that have performed well, you know, in terms of the less management distraction in having to remediate issues and to follow up on, you know, broken processes, etc. So I think the investment that lots of organisations have made in this space have really paid off, and I think has really reinforced the value of compliance and risk management. I think as a positive. On a challenge piece, I think I'd resonate with the connecting with our colleagues, particularly in compliance, making sure that everyone feels connected and still part of the organisation when you don't see somebody for 6, 9, 12 months. It's a challenge, and it's one that I'm learning every day on, I have to say.
Yeah, I think visibility is very important to, you know, compliance professionals, and being visible and being accessible. So I think the pandemic has certainly, and lockdown has made that more challenging. But taking my cue from our earlier speakers who tried to look to the future and tried to extract some positives, Ger, how do you continue to grow and develop as a leader? So what do you feel? How do you continue to work on your own leadership abilities?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think it's continuing in terms of the qualities I would bring in terms of that leader stepping up. You know, if I'm going into a new role, sort of setting that vision and bringing people together, building those partnerships. So, you know, going into a new environment, you're building those partnerships again, but you're leveraging the skills that you've already learned in doing that. So, you know, that's something that just continues to evolve and I continue to work on. And I think the other piece is, you know, your sort of agility and being able to learn, take on new things and understand how quick you can actually acquire new knowledge and your ability to apply it into context and what you're looking at. And also the ability to see things in the round. So, you know, when you get to those more senior levels, you have to be able to process a lot of information and start to do the analysis on it in terms of looking at across the environment, whilst at the same time the ability to sort of dig down deep into certain areas as required. So you have both of that sort of macro and micro understanding of what's happening. And that becomes all about continuously learning, keeping your mind open to those opportunities to learn more, listening to people more as well, bringing those insights to bear into problems that, you know, I would be involved in looking to solve as well. And, you know, particularly my new role is actually, the thing about it is when you're sitting in front of clients, it's actually really listening to what the problem is and then understanding what it is they need as opposed to what I might want to give them. And those are two very, very different things. And I think that is just a real part of that sort of learning journey and that you experience over time is just really listening. So they'd be just my sort of initial observations on that.
Okay, and James, just continuing with the theme of the future and looking to the next 5 or 10 years, what do you see as the biggest challenge or priorities as we come out of the post-COVID world? Hopefully we will get there.
Yeah, well, I think for compliance officers, the challenges are going to be around, I think, as I said earlier, I think we are faced with new realities. We are faced with a lot of new ways of working. I think we're faced with the way the economy operates, and our role in the economy is going to be very different. So I think there's a challenge for compliance officers to actually understand that and also have an understanding of what that will lead to in terms of the regulatory agenda, and to try and be very prompt in identifying that and feeding it back into the organization. I think that's a very critical role. And, you know, as the regulators reflect on the period that we've just come through, they will be looking, you know, at their regulatory oversight and regulatory direction. So I think that's the first piece, and how they respond to that. I think, as I said, remote working is here. So I think over the next number of years, we have to look at how can we more effectively respond to having remote workforces, both in terms of within our own functions, but also in dealing with people. And you know, I was listening to Kingsley on networking and earlier, and how, you know, how that is all changing, and some of the traditional supports that we had won't exist for us going forward. And I think for compliance functions, it's to think about how we can actually influence in that environment. I think we have to continue this transition from the technical support, because a lot of that can be automated over time. So I think the real value that you bring is that ability to bring different strands together. Maureen talked about understanding the business. Jerry, even I was listening to the word just listening, you know, in and of itself, there's some powerful words in there. But I think that, you know, an effective compliance officer, compliance leader in the next number of years is going to be one who can actually pull those various strands together, understand how the impact on the business that we're working in, and then how we bring that in to the organization. I think it'll present a lot of challenges, but some great opportunities. I think it'll present some great opportunities for people in compliance who step up to that challenge to be much more involved in helping to drive the strategy of an organization as well. And so, you know, it can be quite positive.
Great, thank you. Maureen, have you anything to add on that? Any insights there on the big challenges ahead?
Yeah, I suppose kind of things that I've been reflecting on are obviously the change in how we, present, through mainstream banking, how we present our products and services will and has changed and will continue to change, because, this is going to be with us, and almost people have got used to, people who didn't use online banking are now using online banking. People who always use cash are always using their cards. So the way in which financial services products, the kind of digital age has been fast tracked in front of our eyes, and I think they present new compliance risks to the organization that we just need to reflect on. The traditional or the way in which we thought about the risk profile of our individual organizations and the potential compliance pitfalls have changed. So we just need to be thinking about really carefully about how do we have the skill sets to think about what those future compliance challenges might be in terms of detriment to customers or lack of transparency or et cetera, et cetera. So I think that is really important. And obviously the skills that we had, last year need to for everybody, including ourselves here, need to evolve to meet that new digital age. And because lots of regulations were written for face-to-face business, or business that that was where people could sit in front of each other and have discussions. That's gone. So I think it's about us as it's a compliance industry, taking the lead and being as proactive as we can in skilling ourselves, but also setting the agenda. Setting the agenda for our organisations and for the industry more broadly.
Can I add one, Kathy?
Yes.
I know, because I know we're looking to wrap up, but one other area that is coming very much to the fore as well as the whole ESG agenda. So that's the environmental, social and governance piece, and how that's going to come to bear on how we operate as an industry, and things like ethical portfolios on climate change, how as the sort of the banks support that and what that looks like, and how as compliance officers we have a part to play in ensuring that gets delivered. So, and in the UK you've got corporate liability offences that are there, looking at supply chains of organisations and how that works. This is becoming also another big area that has often not been looked at with the same level of intensity and scrutiny as it is now. So I think that is another area that is coming to the fore more and more, and we as compliance officers need to be playing into that agenda as well. That's that whole ESG piece.
Yeah. So the compliance officer is certainly going to be plenty busy over the coming while, and especially if we do expand our remit, as Ger says. I think do I hand over to Michael for that?
Okay, yeah. Two questions. The first one is for Geraldine. It's a long one, so indulge me, please. Hi there, I'd love to ask Geraldine this question, given she referenced Stop the Traffic in the UK. Given the recent downgrade of Ireland to a Tier 2 watch list in the US Department of State's Trafficking in Persons report, what can Ireland learn from the UK, and is there more the private sector can and should be doing to influence legislative change in Ireland? So Aidan would love to ask the question. I don't know, Geraldine, would you love to answer the question? But
Well, so a couple of things. Like in the UK, the Modern Slavery Act was brought in, so that starts to focus on the corporate liability provisions, not just in banking, but actually in corporates as well. And that's the supply chain piece, thinking about ethically how you're engaging people from a modern slavery perspective. So there's some legal foundation to that. The other side of human trafficking is also has links into financial crime, and so where the offence is occurring and then the monies that flow through that. And human trafficking is right up there in the UK as one of the priority areas being looked at under public-private partnership and how to disrupt it. And so there's a lot working with law enforcement, coming up with typologies. Also, when I was in Barclays, we did an awful lot of work with law enforcement, with the likes of Facebook and Stop the Traffic to actually put campaigns out in various communities around whether it was modern slavery, sexual exploitation, county lines, all that sort of stuff, which really brought it to life for the person on the street and things to watch out for. So there's a lot that can be done. I mean, we are seeing intelligence, certainly through the work I'm doing with Stop the Traffic, that a lot of activity goes through Dublin. So it is something to be mindful of, and if we're seeing that, likely legislators are seeing that. So it's working really with law enforcement and thinking about what it looks like on the ground in Ireland, and actually how we can sort of target that, not only from a disruptive perspective, but from a preventative perspective. So, happy to speak offline. If anybody wants to reach out to me in relation to that, to just get more insight on what's happening more broadly.
Excellent, thanks, Geraldine. There was a question, Kathy, earlier on from your opening address. I very helpfully told you there was a question. I unhelpfully didn't actually tell you what the question was. And maybe we can broaden it out to the panel.
Yeah.
And again, this goes back to the opening remarks where you described, Kathy, the compliance role as having many sides, including that of an equality advocate. And could Kathy elaborate on this equality role, please? Now, we will have Yvonne Jones to talk about equality and that, but perhaps the compliance professional's role in that regard. Again, Kathy, if you want to take it or put it to the panel.
Yeah. Well, I can certainly start. I think that the whole equality, diversity and inclusion agenda has arrived, and we will hear from Dr. Yvonne Joseph later on. And I don't want to prejudge any of her remarks, but this is something that is very much in the crosshairs of the regulator. We've just seen the regulator's done an inspection or a desktop, I think, review of diversity and inclusion in the insurance sector. They have a lot to say on it. They want to be a thought leader in relation to diversity and inclusion. So I think that is something that is probably one of the next sort of subjects that is going to come within the remit of the compliance professional, because change has been very slow to make in those areas, and the central bank has published all the metrics in relation to how difficult it is, for example, for women to get senior positions, and that is the metric they look at. They don't look at how many females are employed, they look at how many females are in senior positions and are being put forward for PCF roles. And I think over the last number of years, it's been something like 21%. So this is definitely something that, as I say, is in their crosshairs. And I think, if firms don't move on that of themselves, I could easily see that being something that, the compliance officers are going to, it's going to fall in within their remit in some way, shape or form. So that's my glimpse into the future.
Okay,
I don't know if the panel want to say anything on that one.
Yeah, I might make maybe just on diversity. I think Kingsley spoke about the kind of the organizations should reflect the society in which they serve, and certainly banking serves society, and therefore it's really important. I think it's inextricably linked. Diversity is inextricably linked to culture, and culture is obviously inextricably linked to good outcomes for customers. So I think the continuum is there, and I think that's one of the reasons why regulators are focused on it. If you've got a diverse organization that represents society, therefore it doesn't take much of a leap to recognize, therefore you can drive better outcomes for the society in which you work in. So I think a key component, and certainly compliance officers are playing an important part in supporting the cultural agenda. So I think it's important that compliance officers are involved in understanding and supporting the diversity and inclusion activities and initiatives that organizations should be having top of their agenda. So for me, it's all part of that Venn diagram of driving really good customer outcomes, that our organizations reflect the society in which we serve.
Okay, thanks. I just want to squeeze in one last one that's come in. It's for you, Maureen. I would like to raise a question to Maureen due to her unique exposure to both risk and compliance. Risk and compliance both act as a second line of defense to protect the firm and its customers. How do you see these functions working together post-COVID-19 to become a more value-added partner to the business?
Yeah, I think as I said earlier, I think as a result of COVID, there's been many challenges. I think the value of risk and compliance have really come to the fore both from the operational resilience, the significant engagement with regulators, and quite rightly, the integrity of the financial services is massively important to be maintained, particularly in the middle of the global pandemic, where people can't leave their houses, but they need to buy goods and buy services. So I think so never waste a crisis. I think there's a real opportunity for people working in compliance to come to the fore in terms of how they're supporting their organisation manage their regulatory engagements, and making sure that, again, the vast majority of our compliance requirements ultimately are about making sure that our goods and services, that the services that we provide to our customers, are fair and transparent. And that's even more to the fore now, particularly during the current crisis. So I would encourage compliance officers to really, make hay when the sun shines. Never waste a crisis, to basically get the compliance agenda, further up the totem pole of where it should be. So I think this, for me, I think this is a massive game changer for the importance of risk and compliance across the industry.
Maureen and James, for that. I think you really did bring together what went before, so it was really useful. So thank you. Thank you for this, for the session.
You're welcome. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.